I want to welcome both you, Gil Jenkins and Lorraine Gershman. We're going to start our panel Connecting with Businesses now. I'm Callie Hancock, the CCL New Jersey State Coordinator and the moderator for our discussion today of Connecting with Businesses. Ryan Carter, our volunteer with the Raritan Valley chapter in New Jersey, will be helping with questions and answers, QA. So when we get to that point, when you have questions, please put them in the chat. And Ryan will also be posting some informational links. I am really excited to have on our panel today two representatives of companies headquartered in our Mid-Atlantic region, DuPont, based in Wilmington, Delaware, and Hannon Armstrong in Annapolis, Maryland. Our overall goal today is to give listeners a look at how a couple of large companies are taking action against climate change. We'll learn how they've interfaced with Citizens Climate Lobby and provide encouragement for CCL members to reach out to other potential business allies. I'll introduce our guests briefly, and then each will describe their companies far better than I could and how their businesses connect to climate policy and to CCL. And you can find more detailed biographies in the conference program. I'll start with our panelists from DuPont, since the original predecessor DuPont company dates all the way back to 1802. In 2018, Lorraine Krupa Gershman joined a modern incarnation of DuPont, where she is part of the DC-based government affairs team. She leads DuPont's federal government advocacy efforts on environmental and chemical issues, including climate change, sustainability, and water issues. Lorraine holds advanced degrees in civil and environmental engineering, and she's a registered professional engineer. I'm just going to introduce the other panelist and then get to a question. Our other panelist is Gil Jenkins from the Climate Solutions Capital Investment Company, Hannon Armstrong. You can tell that's a newer company because this is a new venture. Gil is the Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs, guiding the company's external communications and brand marketing strategy. Previously, he was the Vice President of Communications for the American Council on Renewable Energy, and he has prior experience in public relations and advertising. So my first question would be to ask you to describe your company and your mission and how these connect to the climate issue. I'll start with Lorraine of DuPont, please.
Sure, and thanks for having me. Today's DuPont has a purpose to empower the world with the essential innovations to thrive. We provide protective equipment for the military. We deliver clean water through a lot of different filters and partners. We enable smarter, faster electronics, and we actually protect the James Webb Space Telescope, which was launched back in December. So that's something that gold foil you see on it is a DuPont product. We are using our passion and our expertise in science and innovation to create sustainable solutions for the complex challenges facing our world. So that's a nutshell of what the current iteration of DuPont is. In the climate space, we have set 2030 goals that they are highlighted in that sustainability report that was linked in the chat. Our short-term goals are to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. And that includes sourcing 60% of our electricity from renewable energy. So that's our 2030 goals. And then we aim to be carbon neutral by 2050. So, short term, we are well on our way. And then longer term, thinking about the investments and decisions we need to make to get there.
Thanks, Lorraine. That's awesome, especially about the James Webb Telescope. Pretty cool. Gil, do you want to tell us about Hannon Armstrong?
Sure. So Hannon Armstrong, we've been publicly traded since 2013, but the company's actually been around since 1981 and really started investing in sustainable infrastructure, solar, even back to the 80s. So when we went public in 2013, it was really out of recognition that, capital is an essential ingredient to solving the climate problem, right? You need policy, you need technology and capital. So what do? We invest with the leading engineering development companies who are building wind projects, solar in all its forms. We're a residential solar investor, a community solar investor, a grid scale community solar investor. But when we talk about our vision for only making investments to improve our climate future, those also include nature-based climate solutions. We invest in stream restoration projects. And the whole idea is to bring capital to bring bear to this problem, because the energy transition and the transition across decarbonizing all our sectors is going to require a lot of private sector capital. So we're proud to be involved with CCL. I've been engaged now for several years, and it comes from an acknowledgement that we need policymakers to work together with business and R&D from a technological development standpoint as well to really make a shot and have America lead in this issue of our time. So thank you for having me.
We're delighted that you're both here. In the chat, we've put links to both companies, and also wanted to mention a very interesting podcast that Gil has participated in called Climate Positive, with great discussions on topics such as ocean farming, building greener, and empowering Indigenous communities to tackle energy poverty. So check that out, save the chat. And I would love to know how each of you first heard about Citizens Climate Lobby and who made the connection with you. I suspect at least one of those people may be in our audience today. So Lorraine, if you want to start out.
Sure. So yes, as you mentioned, the very own Marty Hopkins actually reached out to me. He came to me from a former DuPonter who was very active in the sustainability and climate space as well. And so, we all kind of maintain our connections and know how to get to each other. And it was because of how active DuPont has been in this space for many, many years. So back in the mid 2000s, we were actually part of a group. It was called the U.S. Climate Action Partnership. That was businesses and a bunch of environmental organizations advocating at the time for the passage of the Waxman-Markey bill, which was a carbon trading bill. And that was something that we were active on with a number of other groups. We were advocating for that. Unfortunately, it got close to getting over the finish line, but it did not. And so, a lot of those companies have maintained contact. We continue our advocacy, and that's really how we stay engaged with CCL and some other groups.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. I love those stories. Gil, do you remember back to getting in touch with
Sure.
CCL?
Yeah, sure. So I knew CCL by reputation, working in the Washington area at my time at ACOR. Followed it, so was familiar, and some folks from the West Coast chapter leading the business climate leaders business group reached out, in part because they saw how much noise we were making as a company. It's an issue that our CEO is quite passionate about. He made it the subject of his 2019 letter to shareholders, and notionally for several years now, it's our #1 federal policy goal by a mile. So I think us being out there in the media and participating, pushing for an economy-wide price on carbon through various trade associations we were in, it was reasonable that the folks would reach out, and I've enjoyed participating directly with fellow citizens. I'm a business leader, but I'm also a citizen too. So I just have really enjoyed the grassroots strength and the intellectual firepower and expertise of the staff and all the volunteers. It's a really unique blend. So it's kind of a no-brainer that a company that's leaning into this issue like ours would want to be a part of such a powerful force for good.
That's wonderful to hear. I believe one of your contacts with CCL's government affairs, Kyle Kameen, is also in our audience right now, and that you two work together whenever it's possible. Thank you. I'm going to turn the conversation to carbon pricing itself now in various forms. For example, if you could describe what the implementation of carbon pricing in some form might be expected to, how it would affect your business. Um, that would be great to compare between DuPont and Hannon Armstrong.
Sure. So, we recognize as a company that a price on carbon is going to be the most efficient way to get to our net zero by 2050 goal. We have been advocating for this through a group called the CEO Climate Dialogue, which is a similar version of the earlier US CAP with a number of leading companies across various sectors and environmental organizations. I know Kyle has regular conversations with those folks. We spend a lot of time on the Hill, a lot of education about what a price on carbon will do for companies such as us. We are, obviously a very large multinational industrial manufacturing company. We have facilities all around the world. And as we see, other regions, we see it in Canada, we're seeing it in EU, they have prices on carbon. And as needing to work in a global environment, aligning globally is always a target on whatever issue. But for carbon, we are particularly concerned that, the US is going to fall behind on this. And we have our largest presence of manufacturing in the US. What carbon pricing also does for us is at this point, there are so many, emerging technologies that are out there that could be the way we unlock our goals, whether that's hydrogen, whether it's some sort of carbon capture and usage, whether it's renewables. I mean, there's just so many possibilities out there. And what the price on carbon will do is sort of enable the companies to sort of pick and choose amongst those that are best suited for them. Some places might wind up being on a hydrogen hub, and that would be the way to go. Other places might decide I can use bio-based feedstocks, and that makes sense for me. And so it doesn't choose the winning and losing technologies the same way you can see some of these other, grant and loan incentives, are little more specific in terms of choosing a pathway. So that's why we've really focused on those sort of market-based mechanisms. Now, obviously, we would have to pay a price on carbon, especially early on, right? We are emitters, most companies are, but then that also helps us drive it, and it helps the shareholders and our board. It very much internalizes that price quite quickly when all of a sudden you're paying out at the end of every year. And so, it becomes a great incentive for companies to then instead invest that money that would otherwise be going towards that fee into a pathway towards carbon neutrality.
Great. Well, you couldn't be talking to people who would agree with you more. And Gil, how does this affect an investment company to have a rising price on carbon, for example?
Well, I may give a little bit of an unorthodox answer here. We don't need a price on carbon at Hannon Armstrong to prosper, but because of falling price of wind, solar, the energy efficiency project, but what a perverse outcome that would be, right? Mm-hmm. The reason we need a price on carbon is because we have to have many more Hannon Armstrongs. We have to drive trillions of dollars of capital into the great transition. And what those other investors need who lack the expertise, who aren't specialized, is that signal from policymakers to make long-term investments. And these projects, they last 20, 30 years. So regulations can be pulled back. Tax incentives are only work for, complex structures, and they add to the cost of the project. So I guess when you work in the climate space and you understand this is about creating more demand, a price on carbon is a demand signal, which drives more investment, and the investment we need at the pace required because we've waited so long to do this. And it's pretty clear that America is not, in my view, going to meet its incredibly important 2030 goals ultimately without a price on carbon. And then we've got 2050 as well. But we've got this decade, we better figure it out, because we've got to we've got technologies today that we can do a lot of the bulk of the decarbonization, but we can't drive the private capital investment at the speed required without that really powerful and rising signal. So I think that's why we feel so strongly. Certainly, it would help our business. The value of our existing wind and solar investments goes up because for the first time, they're being credited for the societal value of not dumping CO2 pollution into the atmosphere. I think it's, you know, it's almost the, it's a simple and elegant and incredibly efficient idea, but the politics, as we all know, are very challenging. And the fossil fuel industry has been socializing the costs of their business while privatizing all the profits. And I think we need to turn that around. I think everyone here would agree with that.
Yes, we don't need to ask them, I'm sure. And it's a matter of increasing the demand because we know the supply would be there if we had that through.
And the
carbon
capital
pricing.
too. I mean, if anybody doesn't believe in the power markets, just look how wind and solar has changed in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, in the last 2 years. So government and policymakers have a role to play, and so do investors. And government investment is important too, but it's not going to be enough. We have to drive private sector investment into these solutions.
Yes, we need to speed it up and raise the curve. Thank you, Gil. We also consider in our work the fact that border adjustment taxes are basically needed to equalize the market across international borders. If the EU and Canada, which are planning to impose border adjustment taxes on carbon, but the US won't have done that yet, what are the ramifications for US businesses, yours in particular, or whatever comments you want to make? Lorraine, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've considered, and I know some folks in the DC policy world, you know, have said, oh, we'll enact regulations that would be equivalent to a price on carbon so that we would sort of be in the bubble for this border adjustment mechanism. And a lot of industry sort of shakes our head and says no. I mean, I think if you look at these past few years with the change in administrations from Obama to Trump to Biden, right? I mean, the climate regulations, nothing has stuck yet, right? It's been 10 years of trying and there's still no regulatory path forward. And I think that thinking that regulations is going to get you to the equivalent price on carbon to enable this, you know, sort of penalty-free carbon trade zone, I think is wishful thinking. I don't see that happening. You know, for a company like us, it would push us then to look at our manufacturing footprint. And, you know, we have facilities in Canada, we have facilities in the EU, and some of these facilities, you know, we make the same things we make here. And so depending on how that price on carbon hits, it might become you know, adjust our production so we're making those products that can, you know, take advantage of the fact that, you know, they don't want to get hit with this carbon border adjustment. They would push their productions to Canada and the EU, which then would, you know, perhaps impact production here. We might have to ramp down a line or two and, you know, shift jobs. And I mean, that's what the advantage of being multinationals are. You have that ability to shift production. Obviously, smaller companies that are, you know, domiciled in the US would then be at a complete disadvantage because they wouldn't even have the ability to do that. You know, and that said, a lot of the larger companies are coming around to the whole price on carbon for multiple reasons. And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot more push from, I mean, even big trade associations, right? We've seen Business Roundtable, we've seen US Chamber, you know, they're all starting to recognize that a price on carbon is only going to help the US business community, because otherwise we're going to wind up being at a disadvantage one way or the other.
It sounds like, yes, thank you, Lorraine. Either large or small companies would lose American jobs. And that's a potent argument for every side of the aisle, I would think. Thank you. And Gil, any comments on the border carbon adjustment taxes, and or we will be moving to questions and answers too. So just to let you know.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add, except that, I think there's been some studies that, the American businesses are already, from a manufacturing standpoint, much more efficient, but it's hard to justify. And again, I'm not an international trade lawyer, but it's hard to make an argument before the WTO that your regulations are equivalent to a kind of clean price on carbon, to be in that carbon border tax club with the EU and Canada. So in one sense, I hope that the work there proceeds, so that provides a pressure point for us to finally put even a nominal but rising price on carbon. But I think Lorraine's comments are probably more precise given her company's footprint.
Yes, understood. And the math required to convert regulations into dollars, as Lorraine first mentioned, seems very iffy, to use a mathematical term. Thank you both. I wanted to just say that our overall theme at the conference is charting our course for a livable world. And we want to thank you, of course, for your role in helping to do this, and basically end up with any advice for us CCLers who would like to engage other businesses and build allyship. So that's a question and the theme of the conference. I want to check with Ryan Carter as well, our Ask Me consultant, to see if you are getting any questions. Ryan, do you want to unmute and let us know?
Yeah, I do have a question in. Sabrina asks, what is the most effective messaging each of us can take to other companies on the need for carbon pricing?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think there are a lot of companies that maybe aren't public about it, but are recognizing the need for this, and particularly public companies, because there's more and more pressure by our shareholders, by investment agencies, by reporting requirements to show what you're doing in climate. I mean, we report into multiple reporting regimes. I mean, our sustainability report is aligned so that, you can follow along with the various requirements, but there's a lot of pressure. And I mean, for us and for a lot of others, we've joined into, voluntary purchase agreements for, sourcing renewable energy. And we're not the company taking advantage of it, because we're working to find opportunities throughout the country. But I mean, that's a cost to us that our board and our shareholders have basically said, yes, this is the right way to go. This gets you on the pathway. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure. And I actually think Gil could probably talk about this better than I can, is the pressure from the investment world. But, there's going to get to be a point where, individual citizens are going to look at their stock portfolios and say, I'm only going to buy from, companies that are making a difference in this space and are really trying to move forward. And it'll wind up being this big watershed moment. I mean, we're seeing it with the fossil fuel companies, right? We're seeing how they're trying to pivot to get to, goals that align with what the shareholders want. And I think that that's something that a lot of businesses are finally coming around to. I mean, even if we don't get regulations around carbon, I think getting to some required uniform disclosure of your carbon emissions is going to lead to a lot of changes in this space. Because I think right now, the way Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 are calculated, there's a lot of, I don't want to say fuzzy math, but, I think especially it's hard to really quantify some of these emissions. And I think if every company was sort of required to do it in the same way in one place, that's really going to be eye-opening. And then a lot of these companies that have not been out there really pushing for it will realize, wow, there is a lot of work to do and we can make a difference.
Thank you. That sounds like good news. Gil, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, that was great. I'm not sure I would add a ton more. And Sabrina, I recognize you. Nice to see you again. We've lobbied together.
Yay.
I think it depends on where the company is in their journey, right? But I also sort of sense, there's a lot of, for reasons Lorraine mentioned, there's a lot of companies, really amplifying their green bona fides, right? Where we purchase renewable energy, and I think the consumer and the retail investor is getting much more sophisticated, and with these voluntary and perhaps required regulations, I think this is a way to say, policy, if you want to be a climate leader, you got to be a policy leader. And I think businesses are starting to understand that the classic things they're doing, folks want to know, are you using your power and influence and money to advocate for climate solutions? And if you're not, CCL and a price on carbon, and the work you do as a partner, I think should be very appealing. And so I would kind of hammer that angle. Again, sort of depends on where the company is in the sector. But the challenge sometimes too is your point of entry at these companies. Sometimes it's government affairs, sometimes it's PR, marketing, or external affairs. And they've got a lot of choices on who they decide to partner up with. And you just have to, make it easy for them and understand, here's how you add value and what we'll ask of you and when we need you. And then there's a lot of cynicism in these companies too. They need to believe that this is inevitable. I believe it is inevitable, but the only way we're going to expedite this solution is with powerful allies and citizen groups like CCL. So.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. I think for all of our volunteers, you've empowered us to go to businesses from the small local coffee shops and up to the larger businesses that each of us might find a connection to. And that is what we can do, as well as presentations and getting the word out through the usual media channels, letters to the editor, Twitter, and so on, so that businesses see that they have support in building this livable world. And I don't know if we have any other questions, Ryan. There will be many more, but for example, what other climate-oriented organizations or groups you might work with besides CCL that we could ally with. We've only got a minute left though, so if nothing comes to mind, don't worry about it.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
No, I was just going to point out that looking for allies at companies, right? It's sometimes hard. Obviously, picking up the phone and calling the DuPont main number will probably not get you very far, because I certainly wouldn't know how to navigate it, and I work there. But I mean, I think really look to your communities, right? Like, I'm on my child's PTA board, right? And if they had a green initiative, like I certainly raise that up. A lot of faith-based communities have interest groups now. I mean, it's sort of everywhere. And then, I like Gil mentioned, I'm a citizen as well, right? So, it comes up, my fifth grader will come home and say, hey, we're talking about climate. And I'm like, great, you want me to come in? I'll happy to, but it's just getting there, and then people realizing, wow, there's, a lot of people in the, world that, down the street, hey, they're already working in this space. That's great. Maybe we can align. I mean, there's a whole, network of us, and Gil would know this in DC. There's tons and tons of, environmental professional groups where a bunch of us do the advocacy. We all talk as well, and, we're trying different tactics, and we're aligned with different groups. But, part of it is, people know they can come to me and talk climate as a person or as DuPont, right? Because they know that I'm an expert in that space. And so that only helps then magnify it, and getting, comfort with other folks like you in companies to say, yes, I care about this too, and let's move forward.
Thank you, Lorraine. That's a really inspiring note to end on. And the thought that, companies are made up of citizens and families really helps us to remember that everybody's looking for the same future, a good future, I think. So with that, we'll need to let people get their break before the next event and panels. So thank you so much, both of you, for what you're doing. I know we're all so grateful for that, and for your appearing with us today. So great to have met you, Gil and Lorraine, and to learn more about your wonderful companies. And we just wish you a wonderful weekend.
Great. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you to all the volunteers. You guys are amazing. Thank you.